Coming to the United States is something that can be easily denied. Immigration and travel to the United States is a topic in general dominated by one political issue: Latin American immigration from the southern border, which is a large, porous border that cannot always be universally guarded every inch of the way, consequently allowing people to cross and slip through. But when you keep the southern border out of the picture for a moment, zoom out, and look at the legal travel and immigration to the US from elsewhere, you will notice something striking. The standards set for legal entry are very high. It is in fact easier than you may think to have your US visa revoked. Having been a member of a communist party, a criminal conviction for consuming cannabis, a criminal conviction for assault, any criminal conviction for abuse of a child, be it violent or sexual abuse, spousal abuse, having any sort of association with a criminal organization. These are only a few of the things that will get you denied entry to the United States as a non-US citizen. The list of people barred from entering the United States contains everything from a Northern Irish separatist who refused to renounce violence, a Swiss Muslim professor of Islamic theology who made questionable statements about Islamic terrorism, Filipino leftists who supported Duterte's extrajudicial killings, Germans and Austrians who had been members of the Nazi Party, Margaret Thatcher's son who was convicted for investing in an illegal African mercenary group, to a whole host of celebrities who didn't realize that being convicted of a drug offense outside of the United States will still get you banned from entering the United States. This is a standard that American conservatives have campaigned for and for which they wish to have enforced universally at all American borders. And this set of strict standards has been made relevant throughout the recent year, but also questioned, and not just by the traditional left-wing critics of strict border controls, but by the far right. When fascist identitarians are barred from entering the UK and the United States, borders should apparently not be that controlled anymore, and sovereign nations apparently no longer have the right to decide who may and may not enter their country. And this is deceptively brought up as a supposed free speech issue, that somehow not being allowed entry to a country is denying these people a right to speak. Ironically, they make that case by speaking freely on the internet. What is forgotten in this is that the record of the identitarian movement includes murder, assault, violence against the police, and advocacy of an anti-democratic ideology. And the individual leaders respectively, such as Martin Sellner, who have been declared to be mere traditionalists, conservatives, and decent Christians by pundits such as Katie Hopkins and Tucker Carlson, and many others, especially amongst online commentators, are also not as clean as their supporters profess. Martin Sellner has a criminal record, within which you will find that he pled guilty to vandalizing a synagogue in Vienna with swastikas. Not just any synagogue, but one of the few European historic ones that survived the Reichskristallnacht and Nazi rule, and that in a country where half the Jewish population was murdered by the ideology represented with the swastika, a premeditated crime that, according to the confession, he committed to show support for a British Holocaust denier. People have been denied entry to the United States for less severe criminal convictions. Additionally, combined with recent events in the United States, the fact that these are individuals associated with and leading an organization that has committed several crimes, nobody should be surprised if countries such as the United States and the United Kingdom deny them entry. But this is besides the point. This is not a video about immigration, travel bans, and possible limitations on the freedom of movement. It's about the fact that despite this record of vile behavior being public knowledge, and there being clear-cut indications that this is a fascist movement led by a bunch of, at the very least, very questionable individuals, despite all that, an increasing amount of conservative commentators, especially online, have embraced and endorsed these people. The questions I pose are more along the lines of, how does vandalizing a synagogue with swastikas fit into the values and principles that conservatives proclaim to stand for? Or why does an increasing number of conservative commentators embrace people like this and their ideas? Where do we start? How about with a personal anecdote? About 2 years ago, I blocked a semi-popular far-right Catholic commentator on all social media platforms. I did so because he had retweeted a random alt-right Twitter account, and when I looked at that account, I found that it was also trying to justify the Nazi euthanasia program T4, which was the extermination of the mentally disabled, and all those who the Nazis deemed to be unwertes Leben, which translates to worthless life. When I blocked him, I didn't put much thought into it. In fact, none at all. My reaction was one of simple disgust, and I merely didn't want to hear from that person or see him ever again. Now, however, I believe that I should have stuck around and think more about this, and even screen cap or archive it. Because there is far more to this than meets the eye. It shows something that is by now increasingly more common, and a great example of how a conservative abandons a conservative principle for supposed social gain. Let's ask this. Why do conservatives oppose abortion? It's the same reason why they oppose euthanasia, but also the same reason why they oppose slavery. It's the right to life. What it fundamentally is within especially American conservatism is not a value, but a principle, a right, enshrined as such within the 14th Amendment of the US Constitution. As such, principles form the base and foundation of the American conservative movement. And one of these principles is that human beings have a right to life, that neither a social program or other principles, such as the right to self-determination of a woman, provide a supposed justification to violate. One could make a simplistic argument that it is merely an expression of oppression of women, but that would be dishonest and ignore over 100 years of debate and political decisions about principles taking place within the Republican Party. The same principle of the right to life is also what led to the abolition of slavery, because the advocates of abolition determined that the right to life, liberty and happiness cannot be infringed upon by any supposed right to own a human being as property. This was not a decision made out of a sense of social progression, but the result of a philosophical debate over principles. 100 years later, the Republican candidate for presidency, Barry Goldwater, opposed the Civil Rights Act. This is often falsely framed as evidence of Goldwater having been pro-segregation and racist. The truth is that Goldwater had, as the senator of Arizona, actually helped end racial segregation in Arizona, and he opposed it everywhere else in the United States. But in the debate over principles, found in the US Constitution, Goldwater believed that the individual states' rights to legislate themselves even meant that they could legislate racial discrimination. You can disagree with this or not. I don't believe that state-legislated racial discrimination is protected by the Constitution. I believe a woman has the right to choose, but I also agree that a human being can't be property. But what I don't ignore, and what you shouldn't ignore, especially if you're someone who is in opposition to conservatism, is the simple truth that conservative policies are not an expression of social programs meant to shape society in accordance to conservative values. No, at the core of conservatism, especially in the United States, stands a debate over principles. All of this is the reason you will find many a conservative commentator, politician, and mainly judges frequently quote and cite the US Constitution, because it lies at the heart of their movement, and has been there since the days of Lincoln. And what do white nationalists believe in?
The Constitution, indeed.
My Constitution is an alt-right meme that you can trace back to the founders of the alt-right. It's a rebuke and a dismissal of conservatives. Its claim being that a constitution, more specifically the principles it enshrines, are worthless in a society that is not 100% white, that Jews, blacks and other non-white groups are genetically opposed as a collective to any principles enshrined within a constitution, that such a set of principles would only have any value in a white-only society. In short, principles don't matter. The debates over them don't matter, and their application doesn't matter. What matters is the social engineering to generate desired outcomes for society, those outcomes being whatever this particular group of people believes in to be the best, based on their selfish desires and feelings rather than any principles. This is how an everyday American conservative can find himself in opposition to the prospect of a euthanasia program, while a far-right extremist can approve of it. The white nationalist doesn't believe in principles, but in what the Nazis called the Volkskörper, literally translated as the body national, a group of a chosen race fighting for survival against other races, a supposedly natural struggle for life and death, a war in which all principle and ethical consideration are deemed worthless baggage in the way of achieving a victory for which all must be done. Exterminating the mentally disabled is deemed justifiable under these views, since it strengthens the body national through a removal of weakness in the fight for survival. The way these people manage to bring themselves into a position where conservative commentators go so far as to endorse them are varied. The espousing of supposed conservative values is one of them, such as the supposed adherence to a common set of Judeo-Christian values. However, these people frequently show what they truly think of that concept when they engage in activities such as vandalizing a synagogue. The tradition of family is a concept frequently cited by conservative movements even outside of the United States. Its purpose, though, is best described within Confucianism, which summarizes it as a foundation to form social harmony through private harmony. To white nationalists, the family is merely a breeding farm to produce more cogs in the body national. What conservatism really is to these people is nothing more but a vessel, unfit to find any widespread popularity for their own ideas. They seek to implant them within democratic right-wing and conservative movements, with the ultimate goal of supplanting and replacing the core principles that are found at the heart of them. And this is also done through an integral dishonesty. Right-wing extremists will continuously lie about their true intentions and goals. They do not see the standard of honesty that democratic politics requires as anything to adhere to, but merely as a hindrance. Constant rebranding of the image rather than taking any sort of stand for anything is the modus operandi conducted by this movement, which allows for some really sinister figures to somehow be implanted and marketed as a supposed fresh new face of conservatism. Beyond the identitarians, there are various more examples. The self-styled far-right Christian online commentator Peter Sweden frequently promoted the Nordic resistance movement as some sort of conservative Christian anti-immigration movement to a largely English-speaking audience. And that English-speaking audience is largely unable to read the headlines coming from European countries, where this same organization isn't known for its anti-immigration marches, but for things such as celebrating memorial services to honor the guards of Nazi concentration camps. But the most glaring example has to be when Faith Goldie interviewed Ilias Kasidiaris from the Greek Golden Dawn Party, presenting him and the Golden Dawn movement as just another conservative anti-immigration group. Besides having a record for assault, forging a fake police ID, and other, he is also implicated in the attempted cover-up of the murder of a Greek musician. Golden Dawn described itself as
Η Χρυσή Αυγή θέλει να γίνει και θα γίνει σαν τη Χεσμολάχ στο Λίβανο, όπου είναι ουσιαστικά μια δεύτερη κυβέρνηση.
I have no idea how that in any possible way can be deemed as an implementation of any sort of conservative ideal. And then of course there's the arrest wave of 2014, when leading members of Golden Dawn, including Ilias Kasidiaris, were arrested on charges of running a criminal organization. Now, white nationalists have worked continuously and hard to create the myth of this being some sort of politically motivated wave of arrests, with absolutely no grounds in any real criminal activity. The thing is though, criminal organization is a very serious charge, one that isn't simply pulled out of thin air, and as you will see, there's a very good reason for it. Part of the criminal charges leveled included that property owned by the Golden Dawn leader was used to run an illegal brothel that made up to 130,000 euros for him. Women from impoverished regions of Eastern European countries were lured in by false promises of jobs, trafficked to Greece, and then forced into prostitution on that property. I guess this is what white nationalists mean when they talk about how much they care for white women. These are some very serious criminal charges, and only a few of the 32 leveled in the Greek prosecutor's case. And I don't see how luring young women into captivity through false promises of jobs, holding them against their will, and making money by selling them as sex slaves is in any possible way compatible with conservative values so often professed by those who promoted Golden Dawn. A fascinating aspect to it is that you will find barely any English articles on this extensive record of criminal activity. The only way I got to know of it was through a Greek friend. Some of those conservatives who embrace these people seem to do so not out of an agreement with them, but some sort of idea that a common enemy in the far left unites them in a cause. There's a certain type of historic echo that comes through here, a kind of call from the past. Throughout the 1930s, many a conservative politician in many a European country aligned themselves with and worked together with the emerging fascist movements throughout Europe, nowhere as prominently as in Germany, where it was through them that the Nazis eventually came to power. In their minds, the Nazis were what they could use to rid the country of communists and social democrats. But where are those conservatives now? You will find them here, their names on a memorial outside of the German parliament dedicated to German members of parliament murdered by the Nazis. In the end, despite betting on a common left-wing enemy, they found themselves stuffed in the same cattle wagons and trucks heading for Dachau and other concentration camps, together with their communist and social democratic colleagues. And today, their efforts to use fascism as a means to rid themselves of the left are neither praised nor lauded in any other place or conversation. If any are remembered who engaged in such, they're remembered in disdain. And I guess the most important lesson looking back at this is that the only conservatives from that time period who are still remembered and venerated today are those who were not blinded by the illusion of a common enemy and stood by their values and principles, no matter what. I don't believe that anything as dramatic as this will happen today in our day and age. But there is an indication of what the increasing endorsement of such movements by conservatives will bring upon conservative movements and figures online as well as offline. In 2018, a county chairwoman of the Republican Party in Washington had to resign. The reason? The white nationalist James Alsop had worked for her. He had apparently never told her of his activities. When she was confronted on them, she defended him, apparently not knowing the extent of them. And then, when videos surfaced showing James Alsop taking part in the by now infamous Nazi rally in Charlottesville, she had to resign. And I believe this will be the eventual fate of every conservative commentator who prostitutes himself to these people, either by being lied to or through the misguided belief of being able to use them for their own purposes. Do not confuse the current apparent popularity of white nationalism online with any sort of actual serious grassroots politics. Nobody will ever vote for a swastika.